This week's blog post is Issues Regarding Getting More Enjoyment from Paintings You Love. It is the first of a two-part blog post. Earlier this year I published Getting More Enjoyment from Sculpture You Love, a collection of essays on how to look closely at sculpture. One of my upcoming projects is a companion volume, Getting More Enjoyment from Paintings You Love. It will include essays from the past 25 years or so, most of them previously unpublished. As I work on it, I'll be writing occasional posts about issues that arise. The first issue, which I talked about last week, was, do I have enough material for a book, or will I need to write additional essays? I found out that I do indeed have enough essays already. In fact, I have so many that I may end up cutting a few, depending on how the book reads once I've put them all together. The next issue is, who is this book aimed at? That will determine the style of the essays, whether they're casual, me speaking to a friend, or academic, me arguing a point. The choice of audience determines the hook at the beginning of the book, as well as the angle for marketing when I get to that point, and of course it determines how I speak throughout the book. So I'm going to look at who the essays were originally written for, and then consider the audience for getting more enjoyment from paintings you love. Then the question that I'm working on is, who do I most want to read this book? So, the first essays that I wrote were on paintings at the National Gallery in London. A little bit of background. I became interested in looking closely at art at an Objectivist conference in the mid-1990s when I heard Marianne Suarez give a lecture on painting and sculpture. It amazed me to hear her state that one can objectively determine the theme of a work of art and can objectively discuss why it rouses specific emotions in a given person. She gave a bravura performance that day, backed by decades of learning about and teaching art history, including years being a docent at the National Gallery in Washington. Unfortunately, Mrs. Suarez published very little on art. Metaphysics in Marble is the notable exception. She occasionally offered lectures at Objectivist conferences, but in the 1990s those only occurred every other year. Can you imagine? I am not a patient person, so I decided I'd try to figure out myself how to identify a theme and evaluate works of art. As I said last week, my original attempt was a series of essays on paintings at London's National Gallery. Given that Ayn Rand and Marianne Suarez had inspired my interest, and that I was hoping to present this material to objectivists, it made sense to just assume a knowledge of objectivist terminology. The main points in my introduction to the National Gallery essays were, number 1, what does it mean to identify the theme of a work of art? Number 2, what is an objective method for analyzing a work of art? And number 3, analysis of an artwork to identify its theme is not deductive. It's an inductive process and therefore may seem messy. So this is a long excerpt from the original introduction. Suppose I show you a painting and say, you have 5 minutes to identify the theme and justify your identification. Is your reaction anxiety, discomfort, annoyance? Good for you. It should be at least one of the above. Leaping from the concretes of a painting to an abstraction such as its theme, without knowing the proper methodology for doing so, is bad epistemology. In fact, there's a name for higher-level concepts that one can't reduce back to concrete perceptual knowledge: floating abstractions. Most objectivists have scrupulously trained themselves to avoid floating abstractions. No wonder, then, that discussions of the visual arts make them uncomfortable. Little work has been done to standardize terminology or determine essential elements, never mind to set out a method for analysis and evaluation. Continuing the quote, what we need is a way to proceed step by step from the concretes of a painting through a series of general statements to its abstract meaning. Then stating a theme will be a natural progression, not a leap of faith, and moving from there to an aesthetic evaluation will be a logical step, not an emotional reaction. This paper aims to demonstrate the method for proceeding from a painting's concretes to its theme. Continuing the quote again. What should we call this process? Aesthetic evaluation is incorrect since that requires judging the work of art as well as identifying its theme. Because this paper does not deal with evaluation, let us use the term analysis in the sense given in Webster's, separation of the whole into its component parts, or an examination of a complex, its elements and their relations. I have assumed a basic knowledge of Ayn Rand's writings on art, particularly her definition of art as a selective recreation of reality according to an artist's metaphysical value judgments. Her works are cited throughout this paper, and the annotated bibliography at the end suggests further readings. Okay, that's the end of the long excerpt from my first paper on the paintings at London's National Gallery. Continuing with the blog post now. If you're familiar with Ayn Rand's writings, you're probably nodding agreeably. Terms such as epistemology and floating abstraction were familiar to the audiences I spoke to at New York Objectivist Club, at Lyceum International, at the Jefferson School, and at Second Renaissance conferences. But if you aren't an objectivist, you probably tripped over epistemology and floating abstraction and stopped dead when you ran into selective recreation of an artist's metaphysical value judgments. I made some very good points in that introduction, and there are some that I'd like to keep in the next iteration, but they'll need to be restated for a general audience. Next week I'm going to look at the audience for some of my other works written on art analysis. DianeDurantewriter.com has hundreds of posts on sculpture, painting, and my other obsessions. To join the free Sunday recommendations email list, visit the URL that's on the screen or just email me. And you can say, "Well done, Diane," or support my work and receive rewards by means of the tip jar on DianeDurantewriter.com. Thanks as always for listening.